Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, everybody. Today we are meeting to discuss a very controversial. I would like to welcome you to our evening webinar. Today we have a very important topic which has been a controversial issue between learners and the specialists equally concerning the study of a foreign language. A question imposes itself, which is at the core of our symposium today. How and why we should study or teach English literature while when learning English. Before we start our symposium, I would like to give the mic to our department, to the chair of our department, Dr. Bassem Yahya Jassim, Professor Dr. Bassem Yahya Jassim. He has a word to tell us. Thank you, Dr. Bassem. The mic is for you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is a real pleasure and honor to introduce and attend this badly needed webinar, which will discuss hotly debated topics in studying and teaching literature at university level. Needless to say that there hasn't been yet a unique method of teaching or studying literature that is applicable to all students, to all places, and at all times. Likewise, there is no one perspective through which literature can be viewed. The present webinar introduces different methods and perspectives to teach and view literature. Thank you to all the participants, and I wish them the best of luck. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassem, for this very short and wonderful word. It's quite encouraging for all of us. Let me firstly introduce my colleagues who are the participants of this webinar. Of course, it's me, Professor Dr. Wafa Abdul Ali. I am going to present about the importance of the literary history as a domain we need in the study of English language. We will also go to our colleague, Assistant Professor Shaima Zuhair. She will talk about how poetry has a therapeutic edge, and it's very important for any human being. And then we will go to lecturer Shaima Abdul Ali Jassim. She will talk about drama performance in the class and how it is very important in the study of English language. Fourthly, we will go to lecturer Huda Abdul Latif. She will talk about adaptation literature, how novels and the literary scripts are transformed into movies and how they get influential or they have their own impact on the viewers as well as on the readers. Finally, we will have our colleague, Assistant Lecturer Masha Al Faris. She has a suggestion for teaching literature. Two approaches. She's going to talk about two approaches. One of them is based on the student, and the other one is based on the teacher. I will be brief as much as I can. Actually, my topic is very wide, so forgive me that I'm not going to be able to cover every single point related to the importance of literary history studies. But let me start with the universal question. I would start it with the following question. Is it a luxurious activity that it is not actually needed for the student of any department of English to study literature? Is it necessary to usher into a domain that might be very difficult for learners of English? Is it a loss of time to study an English poem or any literary text? To study, for instance, Shakespeare or T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats or Walt Whitman, Emerson or Sylvia Plath, Emily Dickinson or Sonia Sanchez, or Toni Morrison, to name a few. Is it reasonable or acceptable for speakers or students of English to be unaware of such important figures who shaped and contributed a lot to the shaping of the English language we know today? Is it possible to leave our students and graduates without knowing what is the meaning of Nobel Prize winners and who won this prize in literature? Is it possible to do away with literature and say that we are acquainted with the English language while we don't know this part of the language? So let me go to the other side of the coin and tell you something about literature as a teacher of English literature. Literature, actually, from my experience, is a window to the native speakers of the language. Literature is a window to culture, to history, to geography, traditions, customs, religions, systems of beliefs, etc. We learn about all of this from the English literature that we study. So reading literature is another thing I want to add is that reading literature is a beautiful, enjoyable, aesthetic experience. Sometimes it is shocking, sometimes it is teaching as well. Literature actually teaches us lessons, morals, cultivates our taste, gives us sublimity of the soul. In literature, we develop our vocabulary. A thing I always recommend to my students, I would always say to them, please study literature and build a mind of vocabulary and everyday use of language in literature. Literature is language spoken and written as well. Actually, I will not go on this way of defense. But let me give you some evidences from examples I want to share with you. Firstly, I would like to talk about two domains of literary studies. The first domain is the history of English language. The second domain is the rise of English literature, the history of the rise of English literature. In actual fact, when we say literary studies, number one, we mean the study of the rise of English language that started as a hybrid language of many other ethnics and races who came to the islands geographically located in the region called the Angel Land, which developed through centuries into what is called now England or United Kingdom. Number two, by English literary studies, we mean also the rise of English literature, which also developed with the development of English as the language we know these days. Well, let me speak about the history of English language in a very brief way. This is a very wide subject, very broad subject and detailed, but I will be as brief as possible to let you know about how language came into shape. By this, I want to say that we are now teaching not the regular people, but students of the English department. Firstly, English language history can be summarized as follows. In 550 BC, before Christ, Romans conquered the region, and Caesars ruled, e.g., like, for instance, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, everyone knows, he is one of the great tragedies of Shakespeare's, and he is the guy who ruled this area. And when we say Caesars, we mean that they spoke the Latin language, which is dead now. So the Angel Land in this period was speaking a language which is called Latin language. Later on, in 450 AD, the region witnessed the Germanic migration. With the Germanic migration, they spoke Old Anglo-Saxon English, and they were pagan. They were not a Christian yet. Okay. Later on, in the 16th century, Saint Augustine arrived in the Angel lands, and with him he brought Christianity. So they started to learn the language of the Bible, which is Greek and Hebrew, besides the Latin language. Okay. From the 8th century to the 11th century, now we are in the English Angel land, in the Christian Angel lands. Between 8th century and 11th century, we have the invasion of the Vikings. Who are the Vikings? By the Vikings, we mean the Dutch, the Dutch, the Swedish, the Scandinavian. They brought with them Scandinavian and Norse languages. Look at English language, how, what kind of, let me say, cooking pot it was put into, and got simmered and mixed up with all these tribes and nations who arrived in the Angel lands, and they mixed with each other, and their language also mixed, and this is going to shape the English language and develop it. From 1066, still we have other wars and invasions with the Normans and the Normandy, the kingdom of the Normandy. We know it is French, and they spoke French, and hence French was imposed on this land to speak French, and hence English language that we know today still keeps some French words that it acquired from the kingdom of the Normandy, which ruled this area for decades, and imposed the English language, the French language, and no other language was allowed. And this explains why till these days lots of medical vocabulary came from the Latin, whereas dictionary of law is mostly French. Most of psychoanalysis is based on mythology. By the way, mythology, you know, are a host of stories which were transferred orally. It is part of the oral tradition of these nations who inhabited the Angel lands, and they brought with them the myths such as the myth of Narcissus and the myth of Oedipus, etc. I have to look at who came here. Okay, so this explains why we have a dictionary full of French words, and medical vocabulary are Latin in the main in its main character, while law, the language of the law, is mostly French, while psychoanalysis was based on mythology. And you know, the father of psychology, who is Freud, you know, for instance, he studied Shakespeare's Hamlet, and he analyzed his character and identified his problem as having the Oedipus complex. And we all know, I think, this story. I wanted to show how English language entered other domains like medicine, law, psychoanalysis, and they are originally from literature. By the way, English kept on developing and never stopped till this moment. But the English speakers of today are not able to understand the English of these ages. Therefore, we have to get these written contributions translated into English in order to be able to understand the writings of these periods. Okay. Now we go to the rise of English. This is just a brief review of the development of English language until we reach the 16th century at the hands of William Shakespeare. You know, he is going to create a native tradition of English. He is going to to write in the sonnet form, which is Italian, which is an important form of poetry, and Shakespeare is going to give its Englishness, its English character, and he is going to give its the iambic pentameter form, which is part and parcel of the spoken English that we know these days. Now I come to the second part of my presentation, which is the rise of English literature. Literature cannot be studied solely without its historical context. Look at history; it's very important. History is very important. Whenever we study a literary work, we cannot isolate it from its context. In this period, we have the rise of what is called Anglo-Saxon poetry. It is not English at all. And, 15th century or medieval ages or the Middle Ages. And we have a great writer, immortal writer, who is Geoffrey Chaucer. The date of his birth is unknown, but we know that he died around 1400. He gave us a very rich legacy, represented by his Canterbury Tales and the 22 tales, which were written actually in a quite innovative way, because he also gave it an Englishness which is quite new to its age and quite innovative and exceptional. And if you read Canterbury Tales, and I feel very sorry when I see some of my students do not know who is Geoffrey Chaucer, we have to tell them he is the first English poet, he is the father of English literature, and also he is the father of English poetry. I forgot to know that one of the inherited poems, a great poem, epic poem from the Anglo-Saxon period is Beowulf, a long poem, an epic poem, which is 3,000 lines, more than 3,000 lines, and it talks about new themes to the writing or to the oral tradition of the period, which is about the love of the land, loyalty, ruling with justice. And by the way, Beowulf was written by someone who was at the beginning pagan and then converted to Christianity. So the first part of it was written by, or it's said by, someone who is still pagan, while the second part is by someone who is a Christian. And I want to say that the arrival of Christianity to the Angel Land was not that easy, because it was done also through literature. How that happened, I can tell you easily that the priest or the missionaries who arrived in the Angel Lands to spread the Christianity, they used to establish a stage in the marketplace and act out the life of Christ, his miracles, and hence we have the rise of what is called the miracle and morality plays. The miracle and the morality plays, which were the seeds of drama, which is going to be developed later on into the great drama of Shakespeare, which we know we will know later on. Now this is actually a flashback to the 15th century, and I talked about Chaucer in the medieval ages, in the late 15th century, and his great contribution. Beowulf and Chaucer are a must to be taught to the students, not in full, of course, but at least in excerpts. Now, if we go to the age of Queen Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, we all know the movie that was made about Queen Elizabeth and the history of this great queen who built England actually, and she saw the seeds of the empire, which is going to be the empire of the sun with the late 19th century, the empire that never the sun sets on its throne, the empire that occupied around half of the globe under the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. I will not speak about Shakespeare. because everyone knows Shakespeare. I have no idea how a student would graduate from the Department of English without knowing Shakespeare. At the time of Shakespeare and before he came to maturity and to the peak of his fame and contribution, England became a nest of singing birds with the famous sonnets and sonneteers. The sonnet form became the domineering poetic form, and everyone was singing sonnets, and we have also hundreds of sonnets. Each one of them wrote hundreds of sonnets. It is called sonnet series, like such as Spenser's Astrophil and Stella and Sidney's the fairy. Sidney's Astrophil and Stella and Spenser's the Fairy Queen. So if we go to the 17th century, in the 17th century, English language also developed to get affected by its context. You know, in the 17th century, England reached a peak of scientific development to the extent that we have the rise of a great poet. I didn't mention his name here, metaphysical poet. Of course, he didn't call his name himself as metaphysical, but it was Samuel Johnson in the following decades called him metaphysical poet, because he used the language of science and the scientific tools which were new to the age and which were used, and it entered poetry through metaphysical poetry. When we speak about Ben Jonson and the Cavaliers and the Courtiers, we speak about a type of theme which is called the Cabdium theme. It is the soul of the age, which means enjoy yourself before time runs out, and people of the time wanted to live and wanted to enjoy their life. It goes without saying that John Milton is a landmark in the history of England as a whole, and in the history of English literature. You know, his Paradise Lost and his Paradise Regained, they are epic poems which cannot be forgettable, and we cannot speak about 17th century or English language without mentioning him and the biblical language and the Miltonic sonnet that he created on his own. In the 18th century, you know, it is the age of the reason. It is called also the age of satire. It is the new classical age. Why it is a new classical? Because people of the period, they were all educated in the Roman Augustan age. Such names: Virgil, Homer, Longinus, Plato, Aristotle. They were the figures who were revived and got translated, and their translation into English satire was the contribution of this age. And we cannot imagine 18th century also without mentioning John Dryden. John Dryden, who was called upon by the King Charles in order to write a long poem which is called which was a religious poem that explains the conflict between King David in the Bible and his illegitimate son. It was the same almost came into comparison in his long epic poem, which actually made the king win the battle and win a popularity he would never dream of, and a support from his nation against the rebellious son who wanted to get the throne while he is an illegitimate son. And that is not only not allowed in the Bible, but it is also not allowed in the society as well. In the late 18th and early 19th century, no one can deny the poetry of the Romantic period, which contributed a lot to the rise of a new feeling in English language, the feeling of the romance, the far-fetched, the love of nature, the love of the mother. And you know, it is not English per se, but it is a European movement which was ushered in by the French Revolution in 1798, and it only reached England in 1798. So this is another history the students have to know. Before I go to the final period of study, literary history, we have the late 19th century to the early 20th century. We have the Victorian age, the age in which not only England witnessed a change, but the whole globe. In England, the royal family is no more the ruling power of England, but rather the power is given to the prime minister elected, who is an elected prime minister. And the first prime minister in England was Disraeli, who was himself a novelist, and he was a Jew converted to Christianity. We have to know all of this background in order to understand the writing of this period. And don't forget the position of the woman, how she was an angel between inverted comma angel in the house. She was not allowed to go to school. She was not allowed to learn. She was not allowed to get admission into universities. Universities were only patriarchal institution, open for men only. Women are not allowed to read or get a university degree. You know, all of this, and this led to the rise of what is called the suffrage movement, which is the woman's right to vote, and which of course entered into or continued to the 20th century. And now we have also the second millennium and the rise of the superpowers and World War I, World War II, the decline of religion, the rise of what is called the apocalyptic, the rise of a new era in writing poetry, modernism, modernity, postmodernity, and after all, literature cannot be, as I said, isolated from its historical context when we study it. I want, before I finish, I want to refer to a study I got online done by Walter Moss, who believes that as the present culture these days in the second millennium, as the present culture of consumerism becoming part and parcel of a human everyday life, poets and writers stand as doctors who diagnose the resulting social and psychological diseases, putting a mirror to show and thereby to heal by warning against the deteriorating situation of the whole globe. So in these literary works, we can see alternative visions of life. For instance, W.H. Auden in his poem, The Unknown Citizen. I think some of you know this poem. In this poem, he gives a grim picture of a man transforming into a machine by obeying the rules in every angle of his life. He has become not more than a number in the government's paper. Also, no one can deny that Shakespeare's legacy, even in the second millennium, and his vital role in the study of English language till now is undeniable. How could we know about ancient kings such as Macbeth, King Lear, Richard II, etc., without the chronicles he gave us? Let alone the language Shakespeare has given us that was decisive in shaping our language of today. Matthew Arnold, the poet of the 19th century, and his very famous masterpiece poem, which is called Dover Beach. You know, Dover Beach is the beach that is on the borderline between France and England, geographically speaking. He gave us a masterpiece of metaphors in which he compares the ups and downs of religious belief as the sea of faith. So when we come to study great names of the history of American literature and the contributions of Emerson and Whitman, Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath, E.I. Robinson and Robert Browning, Elizabeth Bishop and Sonia Sanchez and Toni Morrison. These other names like the generations of the 1950s and 1960s of the Beat generation, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg of the USA, and the angry men of England, such as Kingsley Amis, John Osborne, they all struggled against a culture that consumes the human self and soul, leaving humanity in deadlock situation. No one can deny the position the absurd theater had when they spoke about the absurdity of life after the loss of the word of God or the word of the church, and the rise of atheism or agnosticism in its best sense, and the decline of religion, especially in England. So to sum up, I would summarize my point regarding the study of literary history as well. Number one, the study of literary history helps develop an appreciation for our own roots. We can view our roots by viewing and comparing and in contrast with the roots of this nation of England. Two, it helps us understand characters over time and in contrast. Number three, history helps us understand the history of ideas, the ideologies, and and worldwide views and ways of thinking about life, politics, and the world as a whole. I would give you one example. I don't have time to give you a lot of examples. I would give you only one example of the rise of what is called the rise of post-colonialism and the stage of war, the staging of war every now and then, like the war on Iraq. There are many novels written in support of the war on Iraq, such as The American Sniper and The Yellow Birds. In these two novels, if you do not read them, you can never understand the politics that is going on worldwide and how the world of warmongers preach their own word in order to market the idea of war on Iraq in the name of democracy. What is weird about these two novels is that the writers speak about how their soldiers are highly ethical, while the people of Iraq are down with their morality. They are rustic, they are primitive, they are uneducated, they are people of the cave, let me say. They never, you can scarcely find characters, Iraqi characters, except for the translator who is described as a man who looks after his English to develop it, and he is very fond of the accent he is gaining. And finally, at the end of the novel, he is killed by an explosion, and all his dreams gone in the wind. What is his dream? Is just to develop an accent. You know, now I'm speaking an English which has no accent, I know, but I'm proud of my English because it has my identity in it. By the way, the problem of identity or the studies on identity is another issue in literature. There are many issues that can be explained in the literary writings. We cannot live without literature. So how can a student graduate without studying literature? This is a question I want to give to my audience. Now, I think I am done now. Thank you so much for listening to me. I would like to give the mic to my the second speaker, Shayma, Professor Assistant Shayma Zoher. Let me see, Shayma. Let me see if I have a question here. We can receive questions here. I think we don't have the questions. So Shayma Zoher, my colleague, the mic is for you now. Thank you very much for your patience, and sorry that I think I have exceeded the time. Thank you very much. Yes, Shayma.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Today I'm going to discuss one of the sides of poetry that is not usually tackled, especially by us as teachers. That is the therapeutic kind of part of poetry. And before we get started, usually the question that we always face is that why we had to study poetry. Many students will come and ask this question, definitely because poetry is hard for them. It is not so easy to explain, not easily understood. So why we have to study poetry? And for us as a teacher as well, is it benefit? Can we get any benefit from teaching poetry? So there are many reasons to appreciate teaching and studying poetry. And as we all know, poetry is not like any other kind of creative writing. It is set apart not by rhythm or rhyme or the structure of the poem. It is more by its very own nature. It is distinguished by what poetry represents, that is a worthy expression of emotion or deep feelings, and a sense of what is beautiful about the world. Now, poetry can help all of us to make a sense of the world around us and also to know our own place in it. Through poetry, we can know more about the world and the people and all other kinds of beauty that do exist in the world. Poetry also for students and for everybody can provide intellectual as well as psychological rewards. Now, we all know that poetry is as old as language, and as soon as the human beings develop a language, they immediately turn to poetry for recording their history, their values, their victories, their tragedies, and mostly for their most cherished dream or desired dream. Now, is there a problem with the presentation? Everything is so clear.
It's clear.
Is it clear? Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Shema. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Now, yeah. So we all know that poetry is as old as language, as Professor already explained this. And the moment the human beings were able to fully develop the language, they immediately turned to poetry as a record. They use it for recording their own histories, their own values, tragedies, and their most valuable dreams. They shape the language into songs and poems, and it is really incredible nowadays when we look at those poems, which are so old, and how they have stood the test of time through human cultural history. The ancient poems have proven themselves to be worthy of study by people even thousands of years later. They beautifully caught the imagination not only of the people first heard them, but also of the successive generations. And this is certainly a remarkable achievement on the part of the ancient poets, and it is also a solid proof of the enduring power of poetry. I already think that Dr. Wafat discussed this, but it's okay to go back to it. We all know that the earliest surviving poetry was transmitted orally, then it was written down, and it was written in the Anglo-Saxon. Beowulf is the one of the earliest surviving epic poems, and this is just like a brief history of it. The problem of poetry today, okay, there is a problem. Poetry really suffers from an image problem, especially as it has been dismissed by some people as being difficult, whimsical, and even unimportant. However, there are many reasons to appreciate poetry. Poetry is a powerful instrumental tool and an important art to study at any age. This often neglected literary form can help students learn in more ways than can be imagined. The poems are typically short but largely emotional, which communicate thoughts and feelings beautifully. The English poetry curriculum. We all know that typically this kind of curriculum have been designed to acquaint college students with background of the various traditions of English poetry. Also, it equipped them with detailed information on the nature and development of English language, poetry, from the earliest period to the present age, as well as the different movements and their representative poets. Also, the students will be introduced to the major themes and literary techniques of the selected poems. Here there is a short list of the timeline of the periods that Dr. Wafa already explained, and it is usually what you can find in the curriculum of English language. Now, in this sense, poetry gives the student a great tool for developing themselves. Now, reading poetry, we all know that simply the act of reading a poem can enrich the student's cultural experience, and by combining poetry reading with both analytical and creative writing assignments, this will help the student to make a natural bridge between cognitive learning and personal expression. Reading and writing poetry, reading poetry and writing in response to it can also stimulate an interest in further reading of poetry, and it teaches the students the art of creative expression. And now, Carol Clark suggests that reading poetry can have practical value. Studying poetry can be a source of enhancing reading and analytical skill. Understanding poetry demands that one pay close attention to text, especially to diction, grammar, and syntax. This process naturally strengthens reading comprehension skills. While under assignments, we believe that poetry enables teachers to teach their students how to write, read, and understand any text. Poetry can give students a healthy outlet for surging emotions. Now, this healthy outlet is very important. This is the kind of poetry that we really need. It is the side of poetry that we really need in our own teaching for poetry for the students. We are teaching young students, and the therapeutic part of poetry is really important for the readers. We already know that there is two parts. One is for writing poetry. Usually the therapists are going to advise those who have problems to write poem or start writing as a way to improve their mental health. But here we have the side that is related to the readers. For those who have a harder time expressing themselves, reading poetry can have a similar positive effect as writing. Reading poetry has been proven to positively impact mental health, the same as writing. To read a poem is intensely personal as well as communal experience. It allows one to see into the soul of another person, see what is waiting on their minds and on their hearts, and can open doors to feelings that are sometimes suppressed until that door is open. Reading can shine a light on all those dark and hidden gaps of their heart and minds, once thought permanently closed off to the world. Now, the best way, or the best description I've seen is by Philip. She is a therapist from Women's Therapy Service. She said it the best when she said that turning to poetry gives rhythm to silence, light to darkness. In poetry, you find magic of metaphor, compactness of expression, use of the five senses, and simplicity or complexity of meaning in a few lines. One aspect of teaching poetry that have been unfortunately neglected is the therapeutic or the healing power of poetry. Whether it is through spoken words or written, poetry represents the best outlets, especially for the young students, as it helps them to express emotions in controlled way. Can help young students really find and nurture their individual voices, allowing them to tap into their creativity and to better understand themselves. In a world that is so confusing and frustrating, poetry could play a vital role in the lives of the young student and helps to heal the wounds they carried in the journeys of their lives. Moreover, the transcendent power of poetry is represented in the way poetry equips students with lifelong skills that are essential for success in all areas of life. persistence, perspective, empathy, and most of all, creativity. So at the end of it, in the light of all what have been discussed or said, the question is that what could be more crucial for the students through education than poetry? Thank you so much for it.
Thank you so much, Shaima. Now
you,
we go to the third speaker, lecturer Shaima Abdel Ali. She will talk about drama performance and its role in English language. Yes, Shaima, the mic is for you now.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, my dear.
My task today is to shed light on drama teaching. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "Tell me, I'll forget. Show me, I may remember. Involve me, I will understand." Involving students in drama activities in class motivates the students and helps speed up their learning process. It also improves their relationship with each other and the atmosphere of the class. Now, I'm supposed to give you a definition of drama, but I'm addressing academic minds that are aware of the term. Therefore, I don't need to tell you that it is a Greek term that means to do or to act. I also don't need to tell you that its main object is to portray life or character or tell a story through actions and dialogues, typically designed for theatrical performance. It introduces the students to real life as well as fantasy situations and characters. Drama in an educating institute means using the theater for a purpose beyond entertaining an audience. This purpose is to change the knowledge, attitude, behavior of the audience, let alone the culture scope and the speed up of language learning that it provides. Drama also bridges the gap between textbook dialogues and natural usage of language. And it can also help to bridge a similar gap between the classroom and real life situation. It is fun, it is creative, it allows our students to use language in context, which is most important. It can overcome the students' resistance to learning the new language by reading the dialogues in the text. The students are exposed to using the new language they have been guided to through linguistic lessons. Through drama, the student feels more responsible because he has to interpret and understand not only the vocabulary, but the situation and the build-up of dialogues. This also provides a chance for the student to marry literature to language by means of studying pragmatics. Students are exposed to a wider range of language rather than the repeated drilling of decontextualized language patterns. One of the drawbacks of using literary texts to teach foreign language is that most novels and poems contain language forms that learners of a language find difficult to understand. The teacher can overcome this by simplifying and interpreting the language, which by then it loses its literariness. Here, we can shift to drama, as it uses much more naturalistic language due to its form of dialogues. Now, there are benefits of drama performances, and I quote, performances, certain benefits of drama performances, which is engage learners, not only cognitively, but also physically and emotionally. Drama is fun. Drama is fun and promotes an ideal learning climate. It emphasizes the importance of cohesive group work, and it's also to be engaged in authentic language use in a given situation. Now, I will give you my own experience in teaching grammar. I will shed over 3 techniques that I have used through something like 20 years of teaching drama. The first is that to ask guiding questions that develops speaking and listening skills. Such questions are, related, of course, to the text. Is this situation true? You may ask the student whether he or she knows a real life character resembling to the one he is reading about. Is he a happy or sad character? Can this be called a tragedy? Is he a tragic hero? And such questions that stimulates the students to follow up and use their own interpretation. Another technique demands the role of the teacher in class to express the ideas and emotions through gesture and facial expressions. And I've been doing this for so many times. And probably we need some movements in class related to whatever role or character I am reading to the students. Now, I will give you a simple demonstration of what I'm talking about. If you may, Miss Huda, just shift me to the quotation. Yeah, thank you. Okay. This is a quotation from She Stoops to Conquer. It's the first quotation of the first scene of the first act, and I've just given it to my students, and I've done this experience with them last week. Now, Mrs. Hardcastle is talking, and I will be using 2 ways of reading this quotation, so bear with me, please. The first: is there a creature in the whole country but ourselves that does not take a trip to town now and then to rub off the rust or a little blah, 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 blah? What am I doing? I'm doing nothing. I'm just reading. The student eventually will get bored. Probably won't even continue to the end of the scene. Probably will leave me after this quotation, okay? But there is an effort that I can give while reading drama texts to students, as so is there a creature in the whole country but ourselves that does not take a trip to town now and then to rub off the dust a little? There's the 2 Miss Hoggs and our neighbour Miss Grisby go to take a month's polishing every winter. Now, what have I done? I have made it easier for the student to realize that there is something going on. There's action in this quotation. I'm actually starting a fight. I'm Mrs. Hardcastle, and I'm probably talking to Mr. Hardcastle, okay? And I'm starting a negotiation, an argument, a conflict. Through the tone of my voice, the students will realize that there is a conflict about to start. Of course, Mr. Hardcastle is not going to be quiet. He's going to fire back, okay? And while reading Mr. Hardcastle's quotation, I will also change the tone of voice in accordance to the character or the situation that I'm reading about. Now, the third technique, I hope I haven't bored you all. The third technique would be to change the class atmosphere and take the students either to a real stage, which is, I think it's a little bit impossible, or a garden. Use a garden. I used to take my students to the riverbank near Al-Hadba University College when I used to teach there. And we used to sit on the grass and read the text with 2 or more students acting out the play. It was a fun experience where teachers and students from different departments attended, along with the dean himself. Now, in the College of Arts, in our college right now, I use the gardens outside. I remember explaining and reading the text of, I think it was Dr. Faustus, to a small class. we acted certain scenes out. The importance of all of this is to kill the boredom that happens inside the classroom. We try our best to take them out to real life situations, to make the play that they are reading, and they're not acting, they're reading, a little bit closer to life. Now, in concluding all of this, one must say that if drama is considered as a teaching method in the sense of being part of language teaching, then it can become a main aid in the acquisition of communicative competence. It encourages the students to become more confident and fluent in their use of English by experiencing the language in operation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Shaima. It's a wonderful presentation, and like Shaima Zuhair too. Now we go to our colleague, lecturer Huda Abdullah. And Huda Abdullah, the mic is for you now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wafa. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, my dear.
My presentation today is about adaptation literature. Actually, in my presentation, I will explore the importance, the advantages, and the disadvantages of using films and teaching literature through film. First of all, we need to know what is literary adaptation. Generally speaking, the adapting of literary source, for example, a novel, short story, or a poem, to another genre or medium, such as film, stage play, or video game. On the other side, we need to know what is film adaptation. Film adaptation is actually can be defined as the transfer of a written work in whole or in part to a feature film. Ways of adapting can be summed up here. In adapting a print text or theater production to film, directors can stick quite close to the original text to create a highly literal reproduction of the text. Or they can create a totally different version of the original text. However, we have three main types of adaptation. The first one, the loose adaptation. The second, literal adaptation. And the third is faithful adaptation. For the first type, the loose adaptation, director may only use the original situation, story, idea, or characters, and bears little resemblance to the original text, like these examples. Here we have King Lear by William Shakespeare, adapted to the film Run. We have Emma by Jane Austen, adapted to Clueless. We have Macbeth, adapted to Throne of Blood, all of which can be considered as loose adaptation. The other type is literal adaptation. In literal adaptation, older video versions of play productions can be found. Limited use of cinematic techniques. Also, it can be adapted as television versions by BBC. Here are the examples, like Antony and Cleopatra by William Shakespeare. You can see here the name is also Antony and Cleopatra. Jane Austen's Emma, also here we have the name Jane Austen, Emma. We have also the play Othello by Shakespeare, we have the name also Othello. It is a literal adaptation. The last one can be called faithful adaptation. In this adaptation, we have a recapturing of the original text as closely as possible. The careful translation of the original into film and retains the characters' storyline and events too. And here we have some examples about faithful adaptations, like Henry V by William Shakespeare and its adapted version by Hollow Crown Production, Much Ado About Nothing by Shakespeare too, and also it has a faithful adaptation with the same name. And also we have Henry Fielding's novel Tom Jones and its faithful adaptation movie Tom Jones. However, what is important here is that what are the classroom implications, particularly our classroom in the Department of English. Actually, in the classroom, we have 4 important points. The first one is related to students. Students studying English as their second language, so they can watch film adaptations of novels as part of their class. The second point related to teachers. On their part, teachers can create their own activities and capitalize on the media's potential as well as cater to the individual needs of their students. Activities actually address all the 4 school areas: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The third point is related to movies or film. So using popular films in classroom can engage students who might not read course material. It also helps students to better understand course material by being able to relate the materials to a medium with which they are familiar. Finally, and the fourth point is related to film adaptations, transferring the literary book to movie. So film adaptations of literary work can be invaluable to the study of literature, particularly for new or inexperienced students. Actually, teaching literature through movies or film has some advantages and disadvantages. Now I'm going to view some of them. The advantages of teaching literature through film can be as follows. Number 1, they can create a better mental picture. What does this mean? Actually, with movies, students can connect or feel the events or appearances instead of just reading them from books and working with one's imagination. So the fact that one of their senses are engaged means that students are likely to acquire a deeper understanding of the topic. Number 2, they can provide a better form of repetition. So by using movies, teachers make students encounter some of the information twice. So it is better for memory. And since movies have visual aids that they can capture in mind, it will be easier to remember. Also, movies can provide additional teaching as they comprise of extra and sometimes unspoken teachable moments that students can learn, which are beyond what they are for taught, in class. These moments, however, are great and will often highlight other essential topics. Movies can build students' critical thinking skills. So by comparing film adaptations to the books from which they originated, students definitely can sharpen and refine their analytical skills, which is an important part in teaching literature. Critical thinking and analytical skills. Movies can aid students who are visual learners. As a matter of fact, visual learners may not always get the picture from reading words on page, as primarily visual media like films can be worthwhile tools for these students. Finally, and most important, is that movies can motivate learning. So even the most creative lesson plans can occasionally fall flat. Day after day, classroom instruction tends to revolve around the same language-based activities, reviewing homework, solving problems at the board, reading out loud, and working out in groups. But when students get bored, their engagement in lessons will fizzle, even if they include some type of visual learning. By comparison, films can spark the interest of students as few other educational activities can. On the other side, teaching literature through movies or films also has some disadvantages. The first one, some films are too long and take up much time. The second one, some films are historically inaccurate. Some film producers prefer creating a better story rather than depicting facts accurately. It is because a better and dramatic story will mean an increase in viewership, just like an essay writer will try their best to create an engaging story for their readers. So teachers are always urged to point out any inaccurate details when using movies to teach, so that the students will have the correct information. So another disadvantage is that films cannot teach on their own. However, teachers need to be present when the students are watching to clarify controversial topics and to ensure that everyone is attentive. Finally, films require a lot of permissions. Here, actually, films in a class can be shown only by permissions. So teachers need students to fetch signed permission slips from their guardians, for example, particularly for younger students. In conclusion, by using film adaptation of literary text, learning becomes more interactive, funny, and enjoyable for students. From an instructional viewpoint, creating a meaningful context for language use is the major advantage of film adaptation. Finally, teaching literature through films can be a very useful tool for the teacher if it is used carefully and in the right direction. That was the end of my presentation today. For further reading, you can refer to these references. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huda, for this interesting presentation about the adaptation literature. ست هدى ممكن ننزل الرابط الآن بدون زحمة. Now we go to Assistant Lecturer Masha'al to listen to her suggestion of two approaches. One of them is based on the student and the other one is based on the teacher. Yes, Masha'al, are you with us?
Yes, thanks, Professor Wafa. Thank you so much.
The mic is for you, my dear.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'll tackle some approaches in teaching literature. Concerning teacher-based approaches, I'll tackle three of them. One of them is information-based approach, paraphrastic-based approach, and moral philosophical approach. An information-based approach, literature is a source of facts and information to put across to students by the teacher. It stresses the role of literature in condensing values, ideas, and wisdom that have accumulated within a culture over historical periods. Students need to understand and appreciate the different cultures and ideologies of thoughts and feelings which are beyond their time and space. It's a traditional approach and delivers information, facts, and knowledge. It's teacher-centered and demands a lot of teachers' input, giving students various contents of literary text like historical, political, cultural, and social background. Knowledge of literature is delivered as a source of information to students. Now, paraphrastic approach is primarily paraphrasing and rewording the text to simpler language or even use other languages to translate it. Teachers use simple words or less complex sentences structure to make the original text easy to understand. It's teacher-centered also, so it doesn't contribute much interesting activities towards students. Now, the third one is moral philosophical approach. Some learners seek moral values from a particular literary text while reading it. It helps students to be aware of moral and philosophical values and identify them. Students need to go beyond the text for moral and philosophical inference. With this approach, teachers are able to direct students to achieve self-realization as well as self-understanding while interpreting literary work. For instance, if we take The Great Expectation as a sample of Dickens, to apply these three approaches, the teacher should tackle the historical background of the author and the age, and he should talk about the Industrial Revolution and its effect in the society that time, and cultural and social background should be discussed also. Then the teacher will paraphrase the text by using simple words and sentences to make the text easy to understand, and is supposed to identify the moral lessons that are conveyed by Dickens to the reader. That is, affection, loyalty, and conscience are more important than social advancement, wealth, and class. Okay, Ms. Huda, please go to students-based approach. Yeah, students-based approach. The first one is communicative approach. It emphasizes that the goal of language learning is communicative competence. In general, this approach advocates go beyond teaching grammatical rules of the target language. By using the target language in a meaningful way, learners will develop communicative competence. This approach is concerned with the unique individual needs of each learner. Learners can acquire the desired skill rapidly by making the language referent to the world rather than the classroom. Now, communicative activities are so varied. Lazar suggested 3 steps of activities in teaching. Pre-reading activities, which may be carried out with a view to warming up students and arousing their interest in the text. And whilst reading activities aim at developing a purposeful interaction between the text and its readers. And post-reading activities are conducted to deepen student understanding of the text and to stimulate thought and discussion of the problems arising of the text. If we apply this approach on a poem, for instance, pre-reading activities will stimulate students. Before reading the text, it's often helpful to involve them into activities that will create the right attitude for receptivity, stimulating student responsiveness of the text and the willingness to read it. For instance, the title of a literary text is always a pivotal in addressing subject-related and thematic issues. In order to arouse students' curiosity, the teacher may first introduce the title of the poem to the class before dealing with the text and ask students to predict what is going to happen in the poem. As, can you predict what is likely to happen in the poem? Now, the other question may be, what impression do you get from the title? Now, whilst reading activities are designed with a view to make the text more accessible to the students by developing a purposeful interaction between the text and the reader. Some whilst activities is listening to a good reading of the text, reading the text, checking against predictions about the text in the pre-reading activities. Listening helps them to achieve dramatic effects created by sounds and intonations. The sound of the words makes the word somehow dynamic. It makes the word alive. Now, during reading the poem, the students will come to know what the poem is actually about. Now, reading the text may be viewed as a kind of surface interaction, which through further activities at the post-reading stage will lead to a deeper understanding and a fuller appreciation of the text. Now, post-reading activities are carried out with a view to create an appropriate situation for the learners to express their reactions to reading the text. The principal aims of these activities are to deepen students' understanding, to generate interest in the creative use of language, and to provide opportunities to further interaction. Post-reading activities may be divided into several subcategories, which are comprehension questions, language exercise, and creative activities. The issues raised in first session and now answered in the second and deepened in the third session by engaging students to some advanced stages of knowledge. Now, language-based approach. This approach emphasizes the awareness of the language of literature. It facilitates the students' responses and experience with literature. Language-based approach provides a variety of language instruction activities. Literature is seen as an excellent vehicle resulting in the fourth school of language developing through interaction, collaboration, peer teaching, and student interdependence. Therefore, the role of teacher here is to introduce and clarify technical terms, to prepare and offer appropriate classroom procedures, and to intervene when necessary to provide stimuli. Language-based approach to teaching literature offers the opportunity for the students to improve their English proficiency through literary works. Using this approach, literature teacher can create a student-centered atmosphere in the classroom, merely give instruction for the students to conduct in the classroom. Now, Lazar asserted that literary texts are resources that provide stimulating language activities. He also suggests that the language-based approach includes techniques and procedures concerned more directly with the study of the literary text itself. For instance, if we tackle a play, we can apply the 3 stages mentioned in the communicative approach. Pre-reading activities include helping a student with cultural background and stimulating a student's interest in the story. The whilst reading activities include helping students to understand the plot, helping them to understand the characters, and helping with difficult vocabularies. Post-reading include helping students make interpretation of the text, understanding narrative point of view, follow-up writing activities, and follow-up fluency practice. As a pre-reading activity, the teacher may give a brief summary of the story, give hints of some characters involved in the story, and so on. The cultural background is important also. After the students get their interest, they may start reading the story. The teacher can assign the students to find some new vocabularies while they are reading. The whilst reading helps students understand the plot, characters, and vocabularies, and helping with the style and language. The teacher can instruct the students to find the author's purpose of writing his work. In order to help the students with the style and language, the teacher can instruct them to analyze the author's use of particular stylistic devices to convey mood and character traits by asking questions like, what end punctuation often appears in the dialogue of this page? Or, what effect does the heavy use of exclamation marks have on the mood of the play? As the students read the work, the teacher can encourage them to pay attention to the repeated styles of speech that identify the characters and convey mood. After managing the pre-reading and whilst reading activities, the teacher needs to lead them to post-reading activities, which include helping students make interpretation of the text, understanding narrative point of view, follow-up writing activities, and follow-up fluency practice. Asking questions concerning the text encourage students to respond and to think critically toward the literary work. And writing and fluency practice can be conducted as the last procedure in language-based approach. In writing activity, the teacher can ask the student to write, for example, a narrative of at least 500 words. The narrative should take the form of a story, of course. Now, the last one is personal response approach, and it encourages students to make sense of their experiences and personal lives with text themes. It also promotes students to associate the subject matters of the reading test with the personal life experiences. It engages individuals in literary text reading as personal fulfillment, and a pleasure can be met with developing the language and literary competency. Now here we can use brainstorming, small group discussion, interpreting opinions, and generating views from a text are a practice in this approach. And of course, therefore we use more than one approach will help students more in learning. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, my dear Mashal. This is really coming from your wonderful experience of teaching English literature. Thank you so much.